Today's video is on the top 5 most weird borders.
Number 5. Baarle-Nassau, Baarle-Hertog. On the border between Belgium and the Netherlands are two towns which, because of the unusual lines drawn between the two countries, are intertwined like a puzzle. Some parts of Baarle-Nassau, which is Dutch, and Baarle-Hertog, which is Belgian, are exclaves within a foreign territory, and even some houses are split in two. To make things easier for residents, a front door rule applies, which means that the country that the front door is in is where it's considered to be, so all the house numbers also have flags on them so everyone knows. This has been the case ever since the two countries were originally formed. Because the land was owned by factions on either side of the divide, it took a commission more than 15 years to decide how the border would pass through the town. This resulted in the crisscrossed boundary that exists to this day, and you can walk down a street and change country multiple times, only knowing that you've crossed because of the lines of white crosses on the ground. Number 4. Pakistan, China. The border between Pakistan and China runs through the Karakoram Mountains, and the crossing, known as the Kunjarab Pass, is the largest in the world. This is a remote place and was chosen as the site for the crossing for just that reason. Apparently, the Chinese were fearful that the alternative site was too susceptible to airstrikes, so they favored the steeper incline of the Kunjarab Pass instead. It's almost 3 miles above sea level and about 47 miles from the nearest Pakistani village, Sost, and 81 miles from the nearest Chinese town, Tashkurgan. The border is one of the few places on the planet where traffic has to change the side of road it's driving on. Because in China, you drive on the right, and in Pakistan, you drive on the left. And the crossing is also the location of the highest ATM anywhere in the world. Number 3. India, Bangladesh. The border between India and Bangladesh stretches for 2,500 miles after hasty decisions were made in 1947 to separate India and Pakistan. The zigzagging of the lines between the two make it the 5th longest border in the world, and Bangladesh took on the administration of the unique problems here in 1971 when it separated from Pakistan. It used to be the site of the world's only counter enclave, which was a place where there was a piece of Indian land surrounded by Bangladeshi territory, which itself was within an Indian enclave in Bangladesh. In fact, the strange situation here meant that there were 111 Bangladeshi and 51 Indian enclaves on either side of Bangladesh's border with the India district of Cooch Behar. No one's entirely sure why such a complicated setup happened. Legend says that the enclaves were formed centuries ago, when they were used as wagers in chess matches between Maharajas, while another story suggests that it was due to a drunken British officer spilling drops of ink on the map as the lines were drawn in 1947. When the two countries were separated, it's likely that residents insisted on staying part of their preferred country, especially since centuries of war had made towns and villages in the area fractious. The complications on the border have now been fixed, however. After a concerted effort by the Indian and Bangladeshi governments, the enclaves became part of the wider countries they were in within 2015. While politically things have been resolved, those who live in former enclaves often still hold on to their roots, and there are telltale signs throughout the region of how things once were. Number 2. Egypt, Sudan. Egypt and Sudan were both once controlled by the UK, but when the countries were separated and, in the end, granted their independence, an administrative oversight has left one region being claimed by both countries and another being rejected by both. In 1899, an agreement between the UK and Egypt defined Sudan as being the territories beneath the 22nd parallel. In 1902, though, the UK drew up an administrative boundary, which was designed to better reflect the way the land of the region was being used by the tribes who lived there. It put a region called Bir Tawil under Egyptian control, while the Hala Abib Triangle in the northeast was put under Sudanese control. While Egypt and Sudan remained under British rule, this complication didn't matter, but following their independence, it's become a point of dispute. The Hala Abib Triangle is a far more valuable piece of land than Bir Tawil, so Egypt argues that the 1899 agreement should stand, which gives the land to them, while Sudan says the 1902 agreement should stand, which gives the land to them. Since the 1990s, an increased military presence from Egypt has meant that the Hala Abib Triangle has been under control. But with both countries arguing over it, Bir Tawil has been left in limbo. As each country's argument says that the less valuable land belongs to the other, both refuse to govern it. This leaves Bir Tawil as one of the few land areas in the world that's not claimed by any state. Covering an area of 795 square miles, there are no permanent residents here, but in recent years has become a popular target for people wishing to set up their own independent country. In 2014, for example, a farmer from Virginia made his way here to plant a flag in order to make his daughter a princess. And he's not the only one who's tried this. The international community has, so far, refused to acknowledge such claims. So for now, the land remains stateless. Number 1. North and South Korea. Since the ceasefire was agreed in 1953, the border between North and South Korea has become heavily fortified. It roughly follows 150 miles across the 38th parallel as it bisects the peninsula from the mouth of the Han River on the west to the North Korean town of Kosong on the east. Because the two sides are still technically at war, a demilitarized zone has been created. Each side has pulled their forces 1.2 miles back from the line, which has essentially made the space a no man's land. It's one of the most monitored and militarized stretches of land in the world, and there are grave consequences for anyone who tries to cross it. Limited human movement through the area has, however, allowed the former farmland to revert back to its natural state, and it's one of the most pristine environments in all of Asia. There are countless forests, wetlands, and estuaries that act as a haven for wildlife, including endangered species of cranes, bear, lynxes, and fish. There is one place that straddles the border, though, the truce village of Panmunjom. It's about 5 miles from the North Korean town of Kaesong and is where peace discussions and conferences have taken place between the respective sides since the Korean War. Also known as the Joint Secretary Area, it's the only place along the border where troops from either side stand face to face. The town was once full of farms and villagers, but following its destruction during the war, the only building that remains is the one that was constructed for the signing of the armistice, a place that has now been turned into a museum for any tourists that visit. It's here in the Truce Village that President Trump met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in June of 2019 and became the first sitting U.S. president to set foot in North Korea. Honorable mentions. The Diomede Islands. The Diomede Islands are two rocky outcrops in the Bering Strait that lie between Alaska and mainland Siberia. When the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867, the sale included the smaller of the islands, Little Diomede, and the boundary between the two countries, as well as the international date line, was drawn between the two. The islands are just over 2 miles apart, and during the freezing winter, an ice bridge can be formed between the two. This means that, in theory, it's actually possible to walk between the US and Russia, although there are obvious legal restrictions to prevent anyone from crossing the Bering Strait. Little Diomede is now home to approximately 75 Eskimos who live a subsistence lifestyle, while Big Diomede is home to a Russian weather station and a border guard base. As they also straddle the international timeline, Big Diomede is 23 hours ahead of Little Diomede, and they are often referred to as Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Isle. Tumen River. The Tumen River rises from Mount Pictou and flows 324 miles into the Sea of Japan. It acts as a border between China, North Korea, and Russia, and is one of a number of places on Earth where there's a tri-point between countries. Following a border treaty signed in 1985, less than half a mile upstream from the Korean-Russian Friendship Bridge, there's a theoretical point within the river where all three countries meet. The border between North Korea and the two countries run through the center of the river, while the border between China and Russia approaches it overland from the north. As it's in the water, though, the countries have built border monuments on the banks of the river. The river is the preferred crossing point for those trying to flee North Korea into China because it's much shallower than the Amnok River that takes up most of the border between the two. Crossing into Russia isn't so easy, though, because that portion is far more secure.
I hope you all enjoyed today's video, narrated by Zach this time. Be sure to subscribe for more and check out some of our recent uploads.